Hello again. I'm a bit like a boss. Two or three are coming at once after a long absence and wait. After a very intense month of January, astronomically, it's been challenging cosmically and globally, personally, for a lot of people. I think a lot of people in the past month. But I hear that February is supposed to be better. Let's hope so. And we are, of course, heading towards Imbolc and Candlemass, the presentation of Jesus at the temple, the purification of the Virgin, St Brigid's Day, the onset of spring, the flowers blooming. So it's a good time of year, a nice time of year. The seeds we planted, the hermetic seeds planted before Christmas, when we began the Hermit Arcanum at the winter solstice, they're starting to bloom, or they should be, which is why we've moved further into the sun, our binary arcanum with the Hermit. And I've been reflecting a lot generally on the tarot and its relationship with Kabbalah, or not, as the case may be, depending on your view on this. And partly because I've been very inspired lately by the work of Stav Appel, who's been uncovering very intriguing Jewish symbolism in the images, in the tarot images, quite unlike anything I've encountered before, or I believe the tarot community has encountered before. We, of course, are well aware of the association of Hebrew letters with tarot keys, but Stav has been going much further into more Orthodox Judaism, compared with the occult Kabbalah, which is far more typical of tarot studies, which almost aims to eliminate, in some cases, Jewishness from it, whilst retaining the potent occult properties of Kabbalah. And Stav is kind of realigning the occult Kabbalah with traditional Kabbalah, which for me is a wonderful thing, because it also helps to realign Judaism and Christianity and the primordial tradition generally, to kind of restore parts of the stream which might have dried up or been diverted. And all this got to, and all these things are open to interpretation. Nobody's laying down the law here. It's just more interesting things coming to light. And when it comes to Kabbalah and Tarot and the Zohar, these are living traditions, which means that they're always being, as humanity develops and evolves, and the tradition develops and evolves, and it becomes, to an extent, what we make it, which is partly why we do the work. We're not just trying to improve ourselves, we're also trying to rectify the world, complete our tikkun olam, complete the path of return, and ensure this stream flows down the good and true channel, and that it is purified. We've already mentioned the purification of the Virgin, and the water principle is feminine in this case, compared to the fire, the masculine fire. They can be interchangeable, but let's go with the flow. Repairing that stream, in the sense of, if we think back to the Star Arcanum, where the figure in the card is pouring from two jars, a golden jar and a silver jar, and one jar contains all that is beautiful, pure, and good, and delightful, and the divine into this stream. The other jar is pouring the opposite in, the lies, the filth, the poison, the toxicity, both being poured into the same stream, the tragedy of the human condition. So what we want to do with this work is to filter out what's toxic, and to provide a route for the pure and the good. And on the masculine side, if we think of the tree of life, the fire of Shin, the invincible letter Shin as it's described by those in our school, purifies the channels on the tree. In this system, the Shin is the bottom of the Shem pillar, the pillar of the name, the middle pillar. It fires, puts heat under the Athanor, purifies the channels, and prepares it to receive this influx of the holy water, this divine water from the divine stream, from Mem, the mother letter Mem, where they mingle in the centre in Tifereth, the Merkava, the holy palace, before rising to meet the Ruach and Elohim, the breath of God, in Aleph, further up the tree. Yes, and all this, so just going back to Stav's discoveries of more orthodox Jewish symbolism in the tarot, it sort of got, and the perhaps the moot point of whether tarot ought to have been, whether it's authentic to associate tarot keys with Hebrew letters, which not everybody agrees with, depending on their view of the tarot, although it's common in occultism, usual in occultism, to take that view. If we bear in mind that this is a living tradition, then it has become so. So the tarot has become associated with the Hebrew alphabet, and if we, the workers in this tradition, accept this and work with it for long enough and make a strong enough case, so be it. This is how it is now. I just pulled out a card, and it was the Two of Swords, which in this context I take to mean that there intellectually are still two points of view there, which is fine. There has to be, doesn't there? There are always two poles. We're always resolving binaries. You've heard me mention that one before, haven't you? So, because of some things I was thinking about personally today, as I was walking the great big dog, I got to looking up the hygienic aspect of emeticism, which is to do with health, and how the work we do on a personal level, part of the work and the test and the challenge is to do with one's own health and the care of the body, the temple of the soul, and what that means. If you recall, in the last video we were talking about the elixir of life and the philosopher's stone in the solar plexus, which is I would say the seat of the will. On the tree of life, or in the I am prayer, I would say this is the I am the door. I am the door. Whereas the hermit would be the good shepherd. So thinking about hygienic emeticism, which is perhaps not very well understood, and possibly because perhaps it can't be understood until we have a health matter to which it can be applied. As with all these things, it's our personal experiences, and I'm sounding hesitant because when we get into certain degrees of this work, in simple terms, when we get into the second decad of the tarot compared to the first decad is static, sephirothic, archetypal forms, which can be taught and they're recognizable. The second decad is the living tarot, and this means that it's referring to events that take place in the soul of the individual, which means, and so one of the reasons it can't be taught is it's absolutely personal and unique to everybody who's doing it. So my experience of this living tarot and each arcanum in the living tarot, arcane in the living tarot, will be different to everybody else's. There will be sort of common points and analogies. This is why the method of analogy is the way we understand it. There will be points in common and there will be stages that are recognizable, but ultimately these are things that are understandable through our personal experience, and that's when you sort of get the click, because you've read it and then suddenly it's like, okay, now I understand, now I went through this, now I know what they mean. And it's interesting because when you do have that click moment, then the works of people like Moebius, which can seem so impenetrable and difficult, suddenly become clear. And it really makes you wonder, you know, what were these people going through? I mean, these were people on the cold face of the struggle of humanity, living through the Bolshevik Revolution, on the eve of the First World War. You know, was there a more terrible time for humanity? So I guess between them, they had a lot of intense experiences, probably at a younger age. And of course, that would be true of most peoples historically. They had to grow up quicker. They had less comfortable lives. In some ways, easier in the sense of they weren't, their connection to the divine, I think, historically, I think that the connection between humanity and the divine was stronger, and it's weakened over time, because our modern lifestyles are not generally conducive to divine connection and that alignment of the will, the solar will, with the divine. And that's to do with our food, our lifestyles, the patterns we're herded into, you know, the internet. I mean, it's ironic, of course, because I'm talking to you all on the internet, but I don't think people like Thunberg would really have approved of the internet. And Rudolf Steiner, I think that might have been what he was describing as the vast, great spider's web engulfing the earth. But nevertheless, here we are, flies caught in the web. So there's no point, you know, pretending we're not. We can still try and take over the matrix, though, and make it a better place. Anyway, in my roundabout way, I'd been looking up hygienic emeticism, and let me just move this to another screen so that I can read it. It made me wonder what Moebius was saying about this. And now you probably won't hear me because my volume is rubbish, so let me just look at this here. He was actually moving into the 10th arcanum, which will be the subject of our next session, actually. But I think at the moment, looking forward is in our interests. So even though we're still in the 19th, this sun is expansive. Light in extension is a phrase that some people will recognise. I don't study him, but it's a useful phrase nevertheless. So just a little bit from Moebius on the 10th arcanum. In our study, Archetype Man Nature, a special interest should be given to traditional privileges of humanity, since this, in the theosophical ternary, occupies the place of the middle. Before the fall, as we have already explained, man's natural task was the great work which he performed without difficulty. The titles of the Arcanum 10 we are studying provide a clue of certain privileges that fallen mankind still holds. The mental privilege of humanity is testamentum, the testament, given to it by the archetype, and is equivalent to his promise to always remain the vertical bar of the stake. The horizontal bar corresponds to the inertia of man in his present state. Language, an exclusively human attribute, is considered by tradition as a privilege in the astral plane. Just a little note here. That's interesting to me because in the astral plane, I've noted many times that speech is basically telepathy. There, it just appears. It's a shared knowledge and understanding. It's just a total unrestrained telepathy. Anyway, Moebus wants to explain from his point of view. The confused worldview of the present man can be encompassed and expressed by 22 synthetic theses of the 22 major arcana. These in their totality also resemble the horizontal bar of the stake. The role of the vertical bar in this representation would be played by the simplified alphabet, the tetragrammaton, yod, hey, and then the vowel hey, that, participating in the constructive scheme, continually fecundated, one could say, the inert and confused world of the major arcana, with the principle of activity, clarity, and accuracy of the minor arcana. In this sense, the term language is equivalent to the term Kabbalah. Let us develop this idea. And let's also recall Moebus's view that the minor arcana, the minor key, is the greater, and that the minor key is a kind of Kabbalistic expansion on the 22nd arcana, major arcanum, which is the world. So he believed that the majors were really the work of fallen man, a guideline and textbook to help us get back. And then once we'd completed those exercises, we're into the more divine and orderly worlds of the minors. We're back on the right side of the tree, and things are therefore more ordered and harmonious. And speaking of harmony, this was something else I was going to mention, because King Charles recently, I think, I've not seen it, but apparently he's made a documentary where he's looking at harmony. And this is not a comment on being pro or anti-royal or anything like that. I think there are positive and negative things about the monarchy and about Charles. But what really interested me is the fact that King Charles is and has been for a very long time I would say an acolyte and follower even of René Guénon, the perennialist. And the term harmony, for anyone studying this work, is absolutely key. Harmony is placed at the top of the upward triangle in the resolution of binaries. So I found that really intriguing that he chose that word harmony. And he's elderly, and it wouldn't surprise me if he's in his own way trying to do something esoteric here. I don't always think he gets things right, but it's just interesting that he is a perennialist. So anyway, we're developing the idea of language being equivalent to the term Kabbalah. Let us develop this idea. If language is not just a random set of conventional signals and laws, then all the roots of this language will correspond to something existing in the universe. The totality of the roots used in the language will express the total conception of the world of the speaker. Laws that link roots to one another and determine their complexities will present an analogy of the laws that a given microcosm has the possibility of formula regarding the components of the universe. For this microcosm, the role of universe is played by the major arcana. The elements of language will be the lyrics of the initiatory alphabet. For our current study, we use those of the Hebrew alphabet. Each act and event in the universe, when registered, requires compulsorily the use of corresponding, analogous to this action or event, words, roots, and finally the very signs of the alphabet. Thus, Qabala, or to be more exact, the passive side of the Qabala, can be defined as the reflecting mirror of all that happens in the universe. So this would mean the tarot. If the Qabala and tarot are associated, and Qabala is the reflecting mirror of what happens in the universe, then so is the tarot, with the pictorial representations and even more symbols kind of drawn out of that. However, we must not forget that, according to the law of analogy, for each process to be exercised, the influence is reversible. All influences are reciprocal. If the activity of the brain reverberates in peripheral branches of the nervous system, the activity of the branches are also brain centers. If the government exerts its influence on society, it will also influence government decisions. If a teacher in teaching transmits his influence to the students, these in turn lead the teacher to adapt to the needs of the students. So we're always in a tourbillon. This leads us to the conclusion that if we change the position of the letters by alternating the roots and the words, these changes will be reflected in a certain way in the field of world events. This is the active aspect of Kabbalah. Now, we're not revealing too much, are we? I think people, when I observe things that people say and are trying to do, I think there is a consciousness of this leverage, this fulcrum, this power. The danger is that in the wrong hands, it becomes dangerous, chaotic, degenerate. This is why we have to be so careful. And I believe it's one reason why in white magic, so-called divine magic, attack is not permitted, it's not correct, it's not an act of white magic. Defense is, because you have to be very careful that if an attack will create a comeback, basically. So aggression, this is why peace and harmony and non-violence. I mean, it's obvious why you wouldn't attack, but you see, if something is perceived as a threat, it could be a politician, it could be a country, it could be another person. You might think, well, by taking this action against them, I'm preventing something worse from happening. It's not unreasonable, but you have to be very careful that you don't set in motion a chain of events which becomes out of your control, and then it becomes worse. You've generated a bad tourbillon, basically. And so the moment of action has to be judged very, very precisely in order for this not to be the case. You need a bit of martial art there. So it is evident that for this to correspond to reality, the Kabbalistic operation must have the vitality needed and be carried out with full awareness of the operative microcosm. In the same way, as regards the passive aspect of Kabbalah, it is certain that only the manifestation of vitality, unconditioned in their relationship, will be reflected in the mirror. If one receives a fictitious title corresponding to no real degree of power, or if you win a little by playing cards, it is doubtful whether this event can be Kabbalistically predicted or recorded. However, if one possessing power and knowledge acts on the signs and formulas, this action reflects in the events of the plane, changes in the astral cliches, and may even influence mental flows. This is the manifestation of the active part of the Kabbalah and the reason for its widespread use in magic and theurgy. There is an old adage, the letter kills, but one can also kill the letter. The letter kills expresses the power of a Kabbalistic operation. To kill the letter means that one can overcome, overpower, or destroy a Kabbalistic performance of others, acting directly on the plane of ideas or in the physical world, totally disregarding the world of forms, which is the astral. Let's not forget ever that the Son of Man is the Lord of the Sabbath. The symbol that, according to tradition, corresponds to the two privileges of humanity on the physical plane, which were quoted in the ritual of circumcision. This ritual, as something obligatory imposed by tradition, can be symbolized by the stave, and it's interesting, actually really interesting. I just realised this, that Stav Appel, whose work I was referring to, he's basically realised that in the magician, the magician arcanum of the tarot, on the table in front of him, on the old, I think he's working with one particular tarot, a very old one, can't remember which one off the top of my head. I think it might predate the Marseille, but it's reflected in the Marseille, that on that table there are instruments of circumcision. So I'm going to have to mention this to Stav. That's really interesting. And then the vertical line fecundates and represents the tradition. The horizontal element of the figure represents human passivity, his tendency to remain as he is born. However, the ritual of circumcision is also interesting from another point of view and also gives rise to comparison with the stave. In the physical execution of the ceremony explained as being purely hygienic, this is how I got to this, because I was looking at references to hygienic emeticism. We can also see the symbol of the sacrifice of a portion of the flesh, corresponding to the inertia, in order to achieve a certain liberation, that is, active capacity. So we have again the symbol of the stave or lingam as triumph of activity over inertia, and also the allusion to the physical plane as the plane of sacrifice. And he's now going to look at the construction of the old initiatic language, which is now Hebrew. It's somewhat different, it's changed. It's Aramaic is what he means. So I'm not going to go into that because it's going to become a Mebes special and become very complicated and arithmetic. So that was that. Okay, now I've been going for half an hour now. Ooh, look, we've got the sun. Back to the sun. I just pulled out Shmakov's book, The Monster, the Great Big Book, just onto the sun to see if he had anything to add. Well, of course he's got something to add. But do I want to read it all out? I've already been through Kaf 100. Cosmic consciousness. He gets right in there. Shmakov was a great metaphysician, the great unknown philosopher of Russia. A genius. God is spirit, and those who worship him must worship the spirit and in truth. It's from the Gospel of John. Listen to the words of even infants and draw from them the truth that speaks to your heart. Yoga Vashitha. Arcanum 18, the moon, is a teaching about the earthly man, about the way of his life on earth, about its sufferings and limitations of its possibilities and resources. It outlines the life of man, since it is cramped by the framework of fate, and completes the picture of Arcanum 8, which is the source of all teachings about 8 being justice, which is the source of all the teachings about the subordination of the relative will to the higher forces. Arcanum 19, remember we've broken on through to the other side now, thank God, teaches how, under the power of the consciousness of the spirit, the same narrow path of life is transformed into a triumphal march to a higher goal. Arcanum 7, 8, and 9 of the Holy Book of Thoth represent the doctrine of man par excellence. Arcanum 7 is a teaching about his higher spiritual center. Arcanum 8 teaches about impersonal nature as the environment in which a person lives. Arcanum 9, the Hermit, is a teaching about human life as a consequence of Yod and He of this Turner, will and environment. Arcana 17, 18, and 19 represent the likeness of this higher Turner, depicting the individual as he is projected into the world of earth. Arcanum 17, the star, is the doctrine of intuition as a connection with the higher self, with the Atman, the living tarot, remember, the star. It is the doctrine of the innermost essence of the man of the earth, who is alive insofar as he is connected with the upper world. Arcanum 18 teaches about the external world as the environment of life. Arcanum 19 is a part of this Turner and is a teaching about the true conscious life of man. So it's good to be having these awakenings. It means that we're somehow have been managing to study despite... Oh. Apologies if you can hear barking. That's my big dog. I might have to go soon. The knowledge of the truth, the perception of a glimpse of reality and identification with it is carried out according to the basic law of intuitive knowledge, which states that his path consists of 2 stages. Right. I've got a big barking dog. I'm going to have to end it here, but I'll be back.